Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. Recently, we surveyed over 550 safety professionals and produced our State of Safety 2025 report. And this week on the podcast, I'm going to share with you a recording of a safety roundtable session where I ran through the report with the live audience and had an interactive discussion with them, picking on some key themes and highlights of the report. If you were one of the people that took part and shared their views, thank you so much for your help. Absolutely, it was invaluable because we literally couldn't have done the report without you. So thank you so much for that. If you would like to read a full copy of the report, you can find it in the show notes. But do enjoy this episode where I run through it, pick up some key points, have some conversations with some of the audience members, and not pick it apart, but discuss some of the big themes around the State of Safety 2025. Cheers.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
Okay, let's make a start then. So thank you for joining today's Safety Roundtable session where we're going to be going through the State of Safety report from 2025. We were delighted to get over 550 safety professionals who shared their insights, their experiences, their thoughts when we did the survey recently. And if you're one of them, then thank you so much for taking part. Really do appreciate it. And we have done a fair bit of work in the background and pulled all of the results from the survey together into this report. So the report is available online for free. If you need a copy of it, drop me an email or send me a message on here or on LinkedIn or whatever it is, and we'll make sure to get a copy over to you. We'll send an email out with a copy as well. So if you haven't read it, then you can absolutely get access to it and enjoy reading it. And what we're going to do today is just flick through it really and pick up on some of the highlights that came out. And then hopefully the people that are with me today on Zoom can join in and ask some questions or give some comments or share their own experiences based on what are the results coming out of the survey. So let's start and flick through where we get to. So I'll tell you what, I'm not going to go through the executive summary because that spoils everything. We'll start just by going through the survey. I'm just going to pick up on a few things. If there's anything that you see or want to pick up on and talk about in more detail, if you're on the Zoom, just go to reactions, raise your hand, and I'll call you up and we can have a chat. If you agree, disagree, want to share any thoughts, anything like that, then very much keen to make this a interactive session as these safety roundtables are designed to be. So right at the start of this, we asked people a question to try and ascertain whether they were driven more by purpose or by compliance. And it was relatively close, but more of us were drawn to the idea of making the world a safer place than to avoiding harm. So a more positive mindset in terms of how we as safety professionals see ourselves and why we're drawn to safety. And that was backed up with 92% prioritizing prevention of harm over the 8% who were thinking more about reducing risks and costs. So we are in a caring profession. We are caring people. we're thinking as safety professionals about human well-being, and keeping people exposed to our business, working in our business, customers, clients, colleagues, whatever it might be, safe. But we also asked people to share how they felt their organization would think about some of these things. And there was a bit of a gap. So there was a difference of kind of 20% between where we as safety people feel and where we think our organizations are. So it was still the majority believe that our organizations focus on harm prevention rather than risks and costs. But it was a much higher proportion of organizations that we felt would be focused on risks and costs, 20% more than us as individuals. So an interesting way of thinking about that is, we have our way of doing things. As I said, we're caring people. We're focused on humans and stopping people getting hurt and doing the right thing. That doesn't necessarily fully align with our organization. So we need to discuss, consider, think about how we confront that gap. When we asked about the frequency of events, incidents, and the frequency of near misses, we got some interesting data coming out. So of the respondents, 25% reported no incidents in the past year. 49% said that they'd seen 1 to 20 incidents, and 27% reported more than 20 incidents. Now, it's important here to say that the sizes of organizations vary significantly in terms of the people that have taken part in the survey. So if you were working for a big multinational business and you said you've got more than 20 incidents, then that would be more expected, shall we say, than if you worked for a small company of, let's say, half a dozen employees. If you then had more than 20 incidents in that context, that would seem to be quite significant, much more significant than if you had 50,000 employees. So, but we wanted to sort of get a sense of what people were seeing in terms of the frequency of incidents and also the frequency of near misses. Now, 18% of respondents reported no near misses in the last year. I've spoken about near misses with guests on the podcast before and on safety roundtable sessions. Interested if anybody here has got any observations on that as well. But it seems to me, just from what I see and what I've experienced and speaking to other people, almost 20% of people saying that they had no near misses in their organization seems quite high to me. I feel as if that number is not 18%. I feel as if there's much more likelihood of near misses happening, but perhaps there's an issue there around reporting that this is bringing out rather than, the fact that we haven't had any near misses. 29% had 1 to 5 near misses, 21% 6 to 20, and 32% more than 20. So there were a greater percentage of organizations that said they had more than 20 near misses than had more than 20 incidents. That would seem to make logical sense that you're likely to see more near misses than incidents. But the question, I guess, would be, what does this say about the culture that we've got in our organizations if we're perhaps under-reporting on some of the near misses? We asked about Chris. Did you want to say something? I see you've unmuted yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Christian. Are you okay, by the way?
Yeah, right. Very well. You?
Yeah, good. Yeah, good, thank you. Yeah, I mean, just an observation on the near miss thing. So, we're all safety professionals here, so we understand the relationship between near misses and incidents. If we look at that 18% of near companies that say they had no near misses, did they also have have we got the data that says, do they also have no accidents? I mean, are they just really safe places or low risk, whichever way you want to say it? Is there a correlation there? Do you
Yeah,
know?
that's interesting. I would need to dig into the data and have a look at that. But what I'll do is I'll do that after this because I can see that, but it would take me. I
Mm.
can't do it right now because
Yeah,
it
yeah,
would
I
take me
understand.
2 or 3 minutes to run the analysis.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
of course, it could well be that the people that are most willing to share their views in a survey like this are the ones that are doing the best job, and therefore, they are lower risk and performing better.
Yeah. 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 But I mean, I agree with what you said. Your belief is that they probably are having, or you didn't say these words, but they probably are having near misses, but just not reporting them. So is it an indication of culture? Even if they're having no accidents, they're probably still having near misses. So yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, perhaps you said it more directly than I did, perhaps, but I think you're right. I mean, that is what I believe. I think that it's I if we had 100% ability to track without question near misses, I would be surprised if 18% of organizations had no near misses, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
think
yeah,
there's
yeah,
probably a challenge with how we're reporting that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Thanks, Chris, and feel free to share this if you want with your members and so on as well. Obviously, once it's
Yeah.
all in the public domain, so
All right.
send it out if you
Appreciate
want
it.
to. Yeah, cheers. So moving on, we asked people to talk about the exposures that they felt they had to risks in their business, and this wasn't a pick one thing. I think it was pick your top five. Um, and so the top ones that came out were slips, manual handling, trips, and then a bit of a drop. Then we're into electrical hazards, falls from height, mental health, vehicular incidents, and then a bit of a drop again into some other risks as well. Violence and aggression was the lowest at 33%. I know that lots of sectors are really, really struggling with that. I was staggered to hear the data. I can't remember it now, but it was an unbelievably high number of reports of violence and aggression that were being suffered by retailers, and it massively increased over the last few years. But obviously, if you're in a um, manufacturing business, you'd hope that violence and aggression would be relatively low, as long as you've done a good job of hiring the right sorts of nice people to work in your business. So yeah, the biggest relevance of risks is in those attritional, very common areas: slips, manual handling, trips. Slips 84%, manual handling 81, trips 79. And we asked people then off the back of that, where are they putting priority? And the ones that came out here in order were manual handling, falls from height, mental health, vehicular incidents, and electrical. So the priority list that people shared, where are they putting their time, effort, focus, energy, investment at the moment, is slightly different from the list of exposures, albeit the manual handling is top of areas achieving most attention and second in terms of risk exposure. So there's an interesting question here around exposure to risk and where we're placing our priorities and what sits in the middle of that gap. When it comes to harm, again, an interesting picture emerges. So manual handling was the biggest cause of harm among the respondents, 53%. Slips was number two, 41%. Trips, three, 37%. Vehicular, and then falls from height. So we've got an interesting picture here of risk exposure, harm, priority. We also further built on that with what are your top risks by financial impact? Where's this actually costing you money? Manual handling was number one there. vehicular number 2, falls from height number 3, slips number 4, mental health number 5. So we're starting to build this kind of very interesting nuanced picture. You can imagine this as one of those charts where you have the sort of 5 or 6 different axes, and you could sort of plot. Can't remember what those are called now, but they're quite cool to see. You could plot those on there and see. It'd be interesting to see where people's exposures are and the way that they're dealing with them. And we asked people as well about underestimated risks, and the biggest underestimated risk by far that people cited was mental health, so 51%. Whereas the next one, repetitive strain, was 28%, hearing/noise 26%. Manual handling, interestingly, was 25%. So albeit that that was the biggest cause of contributing to harm and financial impacts, still perceived to be underappreciated by a quarter of people. Violence and aggression, 22%. So very, very interesting picture here of some of the kind of conflicting challenges that we've got here. You know, how do we, when we're stretched, when we've got lots on our plate, how do we prioritize our time? What data should we use to drive our decisions around where we focus ourselves and our organizations? So there were some well-aligned risks. So manual handling, based on all those points, seemed to be quite well aligned. Vehicular incidents seem to be quite well aligned. But then there were some under-prioritized risks. So slips, which is obviously the area that I work in, 8th in priority, 2nd in harm, and 4th in cost. Bit of a discrepancy there. Trips, 6th in priority, but 3rd in harm, 7th in cost. Repetitive strain was low priority, but second most underestimated. So it feels as if we know there's an issue there, but we're not yet putting our priority on it for whatever reason it might be. Mental health is a very emerging risk and something that, again, we've spoken about before on these sessions and on the podcast. And then potentially there are some over-prioritized risks, you might argue. Falls from height, 2nd in priority, but 5th in harm. Maybe justified by its high cost impact, and obviously justified as well by the fact that, you know, if somebody falls from height, that's typically going to be a very severe incident indeed. And again, electrical, 5th in priority, but only 7th in harm, suggesting we're doing a pretty good job. But also, you know, as with falls from height, if someone suffers from electrocution, that's clearly going to be on the more serious end, or typically it's going to be on the more serious end of things. Next, we were interested to see what the blockers were. So, you know, we asked about, you know, where are the risks that you face? How are you prioritizing those? And now we're into kind of what are some of the things that would prevent you from being able to achieve what you want to out of safety. And the biggest factor cited here was change resistance from colleagues, 44%, competing financial priorities, 40%, too many competing priorities. I thought this was really interesting, 35%, and then a bit of a drop into lack of senior sponsorship, bureaucracy and red tape, conflicting KPIs and goals. So the piece around too many competing priorities I found interesting because I feel as if we either take on too much or are given too much on our plates, and therefore we're spread pretty thinly in terms of what we can actually do ourselves. So I think that's something that we need to be aware of. Number 2, competing financial priorities. That to me suggests that you know, we need to figure out how we can better explain the financial benefits of safety and what it is that we need to invest in to get the results that we want to see. Change resistance from colleagues as number 1. You know, that's into that whole culture piece. Again, suggesting that it's about how we communicate, how we engage, how we influence our colleagues is really, really important here, and something that we, you know, can work on, should work on, and hopefully, if we did do that and we improved in these areas, influencing, explaining, engaging, communicating, bringing people along on the journey with us, talking about the value of safety. Perhaps we could see that number fall over time. Graham's made a point here in the chat: a visible presence in the workplace at all levels of management and talking to staff reduces the stigma. Yeah, definitely agree with that. So something that did come out was that low incident organizations tend to cite change resistance and competing priorities. High incident organizations tended to struggle with leadership engagement and misaligned goals. So slight nuances there, but gives us an idea of some of the challenges that we need to try and overcome depending on where we are on our kind of maturity level regarding safety, success, and performance. We last did a survey like this in 2022, and we have changed a number of the questions. So our intention going forward is to run this survey annually, and we'll try and keep as many of the questions the same as we can, and then we can start to track how things are going over time. But when we did this in 2022, we asked a very similar question, and the answer there was juggling priorities. So that's a slight change. That change resistance has emerged as the number one. Financial constraints now versus 2022 seem to have grown in prominence. So that's probably reflecting something about the economy, cost of living, crisis, etc., etc. Bureaucracy and red tape have become sort of more prominent as well. So there are some changes here that are taking place over time. Ed in the chat has shared there's an OSHA safety calculator, and there's the link here. So we'll put that in the show notes if we can remember to do that when we put this out on the podcast and the recording available. But that seems like a great resource for people to use to try and get this point about investing in safety across. A few quotes here. We asked people if you could fix one safety issue instantly, what would it be? So a few quotes here that came out. We were deliberately wanted to give people the opportunity to share how they were feeling about this sort of stuff as well. And some of the points that came out that were maybe kind of relevant along the lines of what we were speaking about. Adopting a safety culture and having the whole team aligned. Lack of psychological safety, people being afraid to speak up. Wonder if that aligns to the point about near-miss reporting. Safety becoming a tick box exercise, not real engagement. Risk awareness and decision making at senior levels. Reactive mindsets, too often action only follows injury. Complacency, familiarity breeds risk blindness. So some really fascinating quotes there from people when asked, what if you could change one thing, what would it be? And I think that's a really, really valuable page here on the report. And I wonder if that chimes with your experience and how you think about this as well. So going a bit further into the business case for safety, 89% of the respondents believe that safety can drive profitability. Only 2% disagreed that safety can drive profitability, and 9% were unsure. So we as safety professionals absolutely buy into the fact that you can profit from safety. Whether or not that is shared by our organizations is the interesting question. We asked people to think about what were some of the benefits of safety specifically. And the two that came out first were employee engagement and morale and a positive workplace culture. They both got 74%. Operational efficiency, 51%. Employee retention and legal protection and reduced liability, 51%. and then there were a number of other factors as well. So again, we are buying into safety being good for building our business. We're saying that if we're safe, we're going to build engagement and morale, we're going to achieve a positive workplace culture, and we're going to have great operational efficiency. Now, if you speak to any CEO, any board, and you say, would you like those three things? They're all going to say yes. So we absolutely believe that. I guess our challenge is, how can we prove that? Despite believing ourselves in the value of safety in terms of business performance, we didn't think, or the respondents didn't think, that the safety profession was doing a particularly good job or was particularly well equipped to talk about this. So only 37% believe that the profession is very well equipped to speak the language of business. 10% say it's poorly equipped. So I think there's something there absolutely around, what we can do in terms of the soft skills again, and our ability to speak the language of business to try and drive the changes that we feel we need based on those priorities. And reframing safety as a strategic asset is something that I really believe in. I think this is how we've got to try and approach this going forward. Another question we asked around that was a free text answer was, where and why do you believe safety investment has the biggest impact? So some really interesting things came out here. If the focus is on the less severe risks, resources often stretch further and prevent more incidents. So going very much down that route of the attritional types of incidents, if we put money into those and investment into those areas, then we can have a measurable impact in terms of the overall number of incidents, which kind of makes sense. Digitalization, getting ahead of the risk with data. I'm a firm believer in that, and there's some more we're going to talk about technology coming up. Culture change programs, better reporting tools, supervisory competence. PP is important, but investment in systems and behaviours goes further. So we're all speaking the same kind of language here, I think, in terms of going a bit beyond, not doing the basics, and trying to get this moving, and achieve the outcomes that we want to see. A good point being made in the chat here, with AI models coming in, there's been a shift on real engagement with HC professionals, and people think they can get all the answers from it, but don't understand the ground specific realities and culture which AI can't see. Yeah, a big fan of AI, but we have to know its limits. So I mentioned a little bit there about technology. We had a section of questions around technology. One of the most striking was we picked out what we thought were probably the 5 most common types of technology that people might be using: automated incident reporting, data-driven predictive analysis, wearables, AI-powered risk analysis, and Internet of Things connected safety sensors were the 5 that we thought would be probably the most common. 43% of respondents hadn't adopted any of those 5 things. Although 77% of respondents believe technology can significantly reduce safety risks, there was still a large number of organizations that had actually adopted any of those 5 types of technology. Now, I know, of course, there are others available as well, but again, we thought those would probably be the most likely that people would be using. So there seems to be a gap there between what we perceive as the value of technology and what we've been able to get adopted and used in our organizations so far. So what were the barriers to adoption of technology? The biggest one that came out was cost. Next was lack of knowledge, resistance to change, integration difficulties, no clear ROI, which was sort of 30-ish%, 31%. So cost is the biggest barrier. So that's suggesting, I think, that people are seeing tech as an expense rather than investment. but only 31% say a lack of ROI. So there seems to be this belief that we will get an ROI from it, but there's that initial cost barrier that's proving particularly difficult. It'd be interesting to track this over a period of time and see whether there is a slightly acute pressure on cost at the moment, um, with everything that's going on economically, with the tariffs and the trade wars and inflation and so on, or whether this is more of a challenge, because it could be a market challenge, or it could be around the providers and their pricing models, and perhaps they haven't quite got that bit right yet. So it'd be interesting to track that over a period of time. In terms of the organizations by proportion that were using technology, it was the larger organizations that had the biggest adoption. So if you've got more than 1,000 employees, it was 78% were using some kind of tech within safety. If you had fewer than 250 employees, it was only 42%. So I guess that shows that large organizations have more resources, more ability to integrate. They've probably got an IT team themselves that can look at these sorts of things. There are more barriers for smaller businesses to invest in technology, it seems. So I think that's something there to think about again in terms of that question of, is this a market issue around the trends in the economy, or is this about the pricing? And do we need something to be done around that to enable some of these smaller organizations perhaps to benefit? Now, we wanted to ask people about where they were now, but also about where they saw things going in the future. So we asked about, what do you see as the top safety challenges over the next 5 years? And mental health was the most cited. 65% of people said that. 53% cited skills shortages in safety roles. Now, this was something that I spoke about recently on the podcast, and it was highlighted in another survey where there's a bit of a competency gap. And we do have a profession that is aging. We do have people leaving the profession due to that reason. What are we doing to replenish? What are we doing to upskill? What are we doing to broaden our skill set in terms of some of these softer skills? All of these things would be sitting within this bucket of skill shortages. So I do think that is something that we should be focusing on. The lowest score here of 28% was demographics leading to more incidents. Now, I was a little bit surprised by that, because I feel like that is a big issue that we do need to be wary of. People are living longer lives, they're more active later in life, so they're more likely to be working later, at a later age. They're more likely to be active doing leisure things at older ages as well. But although we can sort of tackle Father Time a little bit in terms of being active later in life, the fact remains that, if we pick something up and damage our back, or if we slip or trip and we break an elbow, if we're 80 and that happens to us, that is a much more severe incident, and it's going to be a much more costly, lengthy and difficult incident to deal with than if we were 30 and that happened to us on average. So I do think that this demographic question is one that perhaps we should look at a little bit more. Climate-related risks were something that people were citing as a significant concern. 44% said that it was a significant concern, but only 22% said they've got some kind of strategy around climate adaptation that consider safety in place. So there's a bit of a gap there. Only 13% of organizations currently using AI-powered safety analytics. So there's an awareness gap or a mismatch there between the awareness of technology and our capability of doing something. I'm sure that will accelerate over time. We're at a really interesting point in terms of AI adoption, where we're kind of 2 years in. Most technologies historically that have kind of mass market technologies have had a sort of 2 year bedding in period, shall we say, where usage has grown, and then all of a sudden there's this kind of exponential increase. And some data I've seen recently suggests that on AI we're starting to hit the bottom of that sort of upward curve in trajectory. So I think we might see, this time next year, even more usage of AI. So we identified a few gaps around preparedness. Mental health was one. Only 37% have well-developed mental health programs. Tech readiness, climate strategy, regulatory compliance. Many organizations still lack digital tools to meet the needs of growing oversight. So there's a few gaps there that we can perhaps ponder on, think about, and try and address if they're relevant to us. And physical risks are certainly in terms of priority being overtaken by more strategic concerns. So on the one hand, that seems to be positive, that the profession is moving towards maybe a broader understanding of what safety is. On the other hand, if we're still saying that 80 odd percent of us are exposed to slips and manual handling and trips, there's a risk there potentially if we sort of try and move past that, move beyond that, if we haven't fully solved that problem, that it sort of comes back and bites us, potentially even gets worse. So we did look at slips in a little bit more detail. Obviously, that's my area of expertise. So I'm always interested in what people are thinking and feeling about slips. Oh, excuse me. 24% of respondents felt that slips were business critical, 62% felt they were important, and only 1% felt like slips was an unimportant category. But there is this challenge then around prioritization, because slips was only 8th in terms of our priority list, even though it was the second biggest cause of harm and the 4th biggest cause of cost. When asked about the frequency of slip incidents, occasionally was the biggest response, 45%, regularly 15%, very frequently 6%, hardly ever 33%. Again, we're asking questions here of all sorts of different organizations of all sorts of sizes, but this gives us a broad view on how frequently slips are happening. One of the things that we asked was about slip testing. So my book, which is called Prevent Slip Accidents with Slipology, is all about a scientific approach to preventing slip accidents. And a key driver of that scientific approach is what's called a slip test. So there's a way of quantifiably measuring how slippery a floor is rather than just assuming how it looks. And interestingly, in 2022, 20% of respondents said they'd had a slip test done in the last 12 months. Here, only 17%. 72% said they hadn't had one in the last 12 months. Now, I would sort of say, given the relevance of slips as a risk, that to me strikes me as quite a big imbalance, and one I think that it would be beneficial to address. In terms of the financial impact of slips, 30% of respondents said 0, 46% said up to 10K, 1% said over a quarter of a million. 1% said between 100K and a quarter of a million. So there are some organisations out there, no doubt the larger organisations that are spending significant sums on slips, but many, the bulk of organisations are spending, say between a few thousand and 50,000. We were interested to see how people's perception was around, you know, looking at slips specifically. How much more could we do? And one good sign was 88% believe that there's more they could do on slips, and that's up from only 67% in 2022. So there is a growing awareness that perhaps more could be done in this area. But why aren't we doing more? The biggest reason was a third of people said it's not considered a priority. 25% felt like they were already doing all that they could, and then we went down on from there. So I think this point about a priority is really interesting on slips. Biggest exposure we've said, very big in terms of costs. Certainly, if you look at the insurance industry, it's the biggest cost of claims. Sorry, more so than manual handling. AXA Insurance gave some data in 2018, and slips was 2.5 times the cost of manual handling from insurance claims, but we're still not seeing it as a priority. What could change that? The biggest thing that people cited was an upward trend of incidents or something serious happening. Now, thinking about the age-old challenge here between frequent low harm incidents and rare but high severity incidents, we asked people where you are more, where you believe that you'll get more safety impact from an investment, and people, 64% of people said they believed you get you make a better investment in focusing on frequent and low harm incidents. 36% said rare, high severity incidents. The harm distribution kind of mirrors that. So 57% of respondents said that harm in their organisation came from the frequent low harm incidents, 43% from the rarer but more severe incidents. But the costs, interestingly, were slightly flipped. So the costs, 51% said they believed there was more cost coming from rare, high severity incidents, 49% from frequent and low harm incidents. We looked at a few sectors based on where people had said that they worked. Manufacturing seemed to have the strongest emphasis on frequent incident prevention. Construction was the most focused on the rare but severe incident end of things, which I guess makes sort of logical sense given what the construction industry does. Healthcare had the highest alignment between harm and cost patterns, so they seem to be strategically doing well and understanding where they're spending their money and therefore putting priority on that. And retail had the biggest gap between perceived harm and actual cost. So there's a potential misalignment there. But what was clear was that there wasn't a one-size-fits-all approach. Every industry was dealing with this slightly differently, which does make sense. And we spoke to people about how satisfied they are with their career in safety. And sadly, 13% of people scored 1 to 3, so very low satisfaction. 22% 4 to 6 out of 10, sort of low satisfaction, I guess. 46% said 7 to 9 out of 10, so moderately to highly satisfied. And 19% said they were a 10 out of 10 satisfaction score. So I think if we go back to the point about a skills gap and a skills shortage within the profession, if we've got 35% of people who are scoring their satisfaction at 6 or lower, then that's something that we should be concerned about. Because if people are in that mind space, then they're probably not going to want to stick with safety as a career. So I do think that this is perhaps a bit of a wake-up call, or at least certainly something that the profession should think about, and we should try to figure out what we can do to increase that level of happiness. We've if we go right back to the start of this, we said we're in a human-focused, caring profession. Waking up in the morning knowing you're going to work to keep people safe is a good feeling. That's the feeling I have, and it's what gets me through the tough days, because we always have, everyone has tough days and tough times. And I'm sure you guys all share that as well. But yeah, we've got more than a third of people who seem to be pretty unhappy in their career. So I think that's something we should really ponder on and think about what we can do to try and support those people, because it should be to everyone's benefit to do so. Interestingly, we looked here at a couple of correlations around satisfaction. So the highest satisfaction score was kind of from mid-career professionals, so 10 to 20 years. And the lowest was from early career professionals, 6.3 was the average score there. Manufacturing sector was the highest sector by satisfaction, 7.6%. Chris will be pleased to hear that. Lowest was healthcare sector, 6.7%. So again, as with priorities and challenges, there are some sectoral or industrial differences here. But again, just to highlight, that early career professionals piece, people that have been working for less than 5 years, they're the least satisfied. We've got to again figure out what we can do to support people who are following us in this great world of safety that we work in. If you could change one thing about the safety profession, what would it be and why? Another of the free text answers. I really like some of these. The auditor, I know best approach. Getting more knowledge. It's important to keep up to speed in a changing world. Less red tape. Better pay. We always want better pay, don't we? More inclusion. Safety professionals don't reflect the wider workforce. Again, a very interesting thing for us to ponder on. So that's the data, and again, you can read through that in more detail yourself. Download it from LinkedIn or various other places that it's available. What can we learn from this? Where can we go from here? A few things stuck out to us. The first was to think about this priority and impact gap. So there is often a disconnect between the risks that cause the most harm and the risks that receive the most attention. So I think looking at some data-driven assessments to look at frequency and severity, looking at gap analysis, building some dashboards. There are some great tools that you can use to look at this as well. Second thing was strengthening the business case for safety. Thinking about ROI, thinking about some of these benefits that we cited. IOSH has a business case toolkit. There was that OSHA calculator that was referenced before. There's some HSE stuff around cost methodologies as well. IOSH, I know, have some good resources around stakeholder engagement to try and overcome this point around change resistance as being a big blocker. So let's think about what we can do there. Thirdly, thinking about how we can integrate mental health into our safety systems. We know it's a big ticking time bomb. It's the biggest predicted future challenge, but it's also an underestimated risk cited by the survey. Thinking about leveraging safety technology better, more strategically, would definitely be something that we should think about. And I guess thinking about meeting the moment. So it's a really challenging, difficult time in many ways for the world, for people, for organizations. And I suppose the challenge that some of these data points bring out, and what I would certainly put across to us all is, we should be trying to rise to meet that moment. We need to be doing the best job we can at mitigating these risks. We need to be bringing in some technology, some science, some data. We need to also be engaging with our stakeholders and overcoming the change resistance and making that strong business case, and that's a lot, right? So this isn't an easy thing to do. If it was easy, then when the HSE put out their statistics every year, there wouldn't be much to talk about. But it's not an easy thing to do, but it can be done. And I believe we can rise to this moment. And hopefully some of the insights and the data from this report and the podcast, the safety roundtable, discussions on LinkedIn, etc., 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 will help us to do that. Yeah, Steve said a session on change resistance would be a good call. I'm going to actually take that away, and I'm going to look into who I can find that that can talk and do a bit of coaching for us. Maybe give us some frameworks about overcoming change resistance. I think that will be a really valuable session for us to do. Ed shared here, who's from Perma. We've got 800 members with 40,000 employees. Many are small operations who'd not be able to engage in safety culture efforts. Yeah, that's one of the challenges we saw with the report around technology as well. If you don't have the ability to be a part of an association like Perma, networking could be a key thing to do. Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of part of what we're doing here on the Safety Roundtable is trying to do a bit of networking. So that's it from me, guys. Thanks for joining me in running through the report. As I say, we will get a copy of that out to you and you can have a good look at it yourselves. But if anybody's got anything they want to share or discuss now, then feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself and just come and say hello and have a chat. But really enjoyed going through the report with you. My team and I put a lot of work into it, a lot of time and effort into it. So thank you very much to those that helped us by sharing their opinions, and thank you for joining us to go through it. And we just hope that it helps in some way, shape, or form to just spark an idea, shift a perception, push us in the right direction, and keep on making the world a safer place. That's what it's all about, after all. All right, guys. Well, look, thank you so much for joining. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. In fact, thanks in the comments. There's lots of thanks coming through. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you again on another session in the next couple of weeks.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.